Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bernard Schwartz, Director of the Poetry Center, and it's my privilege to welcome you to our season finale, a reading from the Correspondence of Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell. The performance will be introduced by Thomas Travisano. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some of our season's supporters: the Greenwood family, the National Endowment for the Arts, Eva Usdan, Joan and Jack Jacobson, the Kaplan Foundation, Amazon, and the New York State Council on the Arts. Without the generous support of these individuals and institutions, as well as the support of the numerous other patrons listed in your printed programs, this season simply would not have been possible. I'd also like to say thank you to our Poetry Center subscribers. Many of you have been with us for years and years, and we're grateful for your patience and your loyalty. For a preview of next season, which will be our 72nd and kick off on September 20th with a reading by Margaret Atwood, please consult the flyer in your printed programs. The full lineup will be announced over the summer. Following the performance, which will last about 90 minutes, copies of Words in Air, the complete correspondence of Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell, will be available for purchase in the lobby just outside the concert hall. Thomas Travisano, our introducer, was principal editor of Words in Air. A professor of English at Hartwick College, he is author of Elizabeth Bishop, Her Artistic Development, and Mid-Century Quartet, Bishop, Lowell, Jarrell, Berryman. A co-editor of the New Anthology of American Poetry, Professor Travisano is also president of the Elizabeth Bishop Society and senior advisor to the Robert Lowell Society. Please welcome Professor Travisano.
Thank you, Bernard. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be introducing a reading from the book that I spent 10 years working on and was kind of an obsession for me. In Elizabeth's very first letter to Robert Lowell, written in May 1947, Bishop notes that, due to illness, she had recently missed sharing the podium with him at a reading of the 92nd Street Y. Perhaps this event, taking place in the same venue in May 2010, some 63 years later, might serve as some sort of reparation for that long ago missed opportunity, though the poets themselves may be present only in their re-embodied voices. Yet how amply and vividly embodied are those voices in the 30 years' worth of intimate correspondence, amounting to nearly 900 published pages, that went back and forth between these poets since that first letter, letters ending only with Lowell's death in September 1977. When Bishop and Lowell first met, each was residing somewhat temporarily in New York, and each had recently won a prestigious award for a prodigious first book. Bishop for North and South, which won the first ever Houghton Mifflin Prize for poetry, and Lowell for Lord Weary's Castle, which won the Pulitzer Prize. Each of these books was extravagantly and insightfully praised by Randall Jarrell, the poet and critic who first introduced them. As the years passed and their poetic books and awards and critical accolades continued to accumulate, Bishop and Lowell went on exchanging and critiquing poems, sharing gossip, observation, and witty anecdotes, and discussing literary, national, and international politics with an insider's eye. At the same time, though each was initially shy about personal disclosures, they also came to talk with increasing intimacy about their complicated and sometimes very painful personal lives. What I like best about these letters is, on the one hand, how casual, intimate, unplanned, and really hilarious they so often are, and on the other hand, how serious they are, how concerned they remain with the problem of living a life and the problem of turning life into art. When they first met, each was coming off the end of a rather messy breakup of a long-term relationship, Bishop separating from her partner Marjorie Stevens, with whom she had lived for nearly a decade in Key West, and Lowell obtaining a divorce from his first wife, the novelist Jean Stafford. Bishop and Lowell's own relationship began in a state of somewhat ambiguous mutual attraction, with Lowell no doubt the more persistently, if indecisively, in pursuit. In the early 1950s, Lowell found a new wife in the essayist, editor, and fiction writer Elizabeth Hardwick, and Bishop developed a long and deep love affair with the Brazilian architect and landscape designer Lata de Macedo Soares, a relationship that caused her to settle in Brazil for most of the next 2 decades. Still, Lowell was not quite ready to let go of his attraction to Bishop. However, even after, in an August 1957 letter, Lowell explicitly renounced the dream of a life with Bishop that he had long considered what he called the might have been for me, the one towering change, the other life that might have been had. The relationship continued to evolve and, if anything, grow deeper in its shared preoccupation with the pleasures and mysteries of life and the pleasure and mystery of art. In the early 1970s, following the tragic death of her beloved Lata, Bishop would return from Brazil to the United States and settle in Boston, where she took over Lowell's teaching job at Harvard University, even as Lowell himself was departing for England in marriage to his third wife, Carolyn Blackwood. Bishop famously disapproved of Lowell's use in his 1973 book, The Dolphin, of anguished letters from Elizabeth Hardwick, whom Lowell was leaving behind in America. This was by far their most serious personal and artistic disagreement. Yet their friendship endured, and in some of their last retrospective letters are among their most eloquent, with that retrospection culminating in Bishop's extraordinary elegy, North Haven, her eloquent, poetic farewell to her faithful correspondent, Robert Lowell. And now, to hear more from that correspondence, please welcome Kate Burton and Michael Kumsty.
For Elizabeth Bishop. The new painting must live on iron rations, rushed brush strokes, indestructible paint mix, fluorescent lofts instead of French plein air. Albert Ryder let his crackled amber moonscapes ripen in sunlight. His painting was repainting. His tiniest work weighs heavy in the hand. Who is killed if the horsemen never cry halt? Have you seen an inchworm crawl on a leaf, cling to the very end, revolve in air, feeling for something to reach to something? Do you still hang your words in air, 10 years unfinished, glued to your notice board with gaps or empties for the unimaginable phrase? Unerring muse who makes the casual perfect.
May 12, 1947. Dear Mr. Lowell, I don't know how to get in touch with you now that Randall is away, but I should think this would reach you through Harcourt Brace. I just wanted to say that I think it is wonderful you have received the awards. I guess I'll just call them 1, 2, and 3. Anyway, they are all very gratifying. I was supposed to read 2 up at the YMHA Saturday evening, but couldn't make it, and I hope my absence was a help rather than a hindrance. I was sorry, too, that time I wanted you and the Jarrells to come here. I got sick. Maybe if you're still in town, you would come to see me sometime. I should like to see you very much. My telephone number is WA51706. Or just write me a note, if you'd rather. With best wishes and more congratulations, Elizabeth Bishop.
202 East 15th Street, New York, New York, May 23rd, 1947. Dear Miss Bishop, sorry to have missed dining with you yesterday, and the time before, and reading with you. I'm afraid you have had a miserable winter. You are a marvelous writer, and your note was about the only one that meant anything to me. Last night at 3, we had a fire. The man who started it fell asleep, drunk and smoking. He ran back and forth from his room to the bathroom, carrying a wastebasket with a thimbleful of water, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Shush, shush, no fire, stop shouting, you'll wake everyone up." Then the engines came out on the street. He kept saying, "An accident, nobody injured," until a policeman shouted, "Nobody injured, look at all the people you've gotten up." After it was over, he went on talking. "I'm an American, I fought the fire, if it hadn't been for me, you'll all be dead." Today my room smells like burnt tar paper. I'm going to Boston on the 2nd and then to Yaddo on the 9th. I hope that I will see more of you someday. The Jarrells and I had hoped to get you to a picnic with us tomorrow. Good luck with your illness. Robert Lowell.
Britain Cove, Cape Breton, August 14th, 1947. Dear Robert, I've never been able to catch that name they call you, but Mr. Lowell doesn't sound right either. I had meant to write to you quite a while ago to answer the note you sent me in New York, and I certainly meant to do it before your review of my book appeared in the Sewanee Review. But someone sent me the magazine, so it is too late now. However, I loaned it to some other boarders here, and they made off with it, so I shall have to rely on my memory, which saves me some self-consciousness about it anyway. I agreed with your review of Dylan Thomas completely. His poems are almost always spoiled for me by 2 or 3 lines that sound like padding or remain completely unintelligible. I think that the last stanza of Fern Hill is wonderful, although I don't know what he means by the shadow of his hand. I haven't gotten the poem or the review to go by. I haven't read Patterson, but your review is the first one that has made me feel I must. The part about me, I was quite overwhelmed by. It is the first review I've had that attempted to find any general drift or consistency in the individual poems, and I was beginning to feel there probably wasn't any at all. It is the only review that goes at things in what I think is the right way. I also like what you said about Miss Moore. I wish I had it here now to tell you the many other things I liked in it, too. I suppose for pride's sake I should take some sort of stand about the adverse criticisms, but I agreed with some of them only too well. I suppose no critic is ever really as harsh as oneself. It seems to me you spoke out my worst fears as well as some of my ambitions. Heavens, it is an hour later. I was called out to see a calf being born in the pasture beside the house. In 5 minutes, after several falls on its nose, it was standing up, shaking its head and tail and trying to nurse. They took it away from its mother almost immediately and carried it struggling in a wheelbarrow to the barn. We've just been watching it trying to lie down. Once up, it didn't know how to get down again and finally fell in a heap. Now it seems to be trying not to go to sleep. It is dark brown and white with a sort of cap of white curly hair, quite long. The boarders and the children of the household are all pleading with Mr. McLeod, the landlord, to keep it. Such excitement. This is a very nice place. Just a few houses and fish houses scattered about in the fields, beautiful mountainous scenery and the ocean. I like the people particularly. They are all Scotch and still speak Gaelic, or English with a strange, rather cross-sounding accent. Offshore are 2 bird islands with high red cliffs. We are going out with a fisherman to see them tomorrow. They are sanctuaries where there are auks and the only puffins left on the continent, or so they tell us. There are real ravens on the beach, too, something I never saw before, enormous with sort of rough black beards under their beaks. The calf's mother has started to moo, and the cow in the next pasture is mooing even louder, possibly in sympathy. It seems that if they take the calf away immediately, then they don't have the trouble of weaning it. It will drink out of a dish, says Mr. McLeod, and he has promised to call me when they try it the first time. I hope you're liking Yaddo, and I should like to hear about it sometime. I almost went there once, but changed my mind. Sincerely yours, Elizabeth Bishop.
Yaddo, Saratoga Springs, August 21st, 1947. Dear Elizabeth, you must be called that. I'm called Cal. but I won't explain why. None of the prototypes are flattering. Calvin, Caligula, Caliban, Calvin Coolidge, calligraphy with merciless irony. I'm glad you wrote me because it gives me an excuse to tell you how much I liked your New Yorker fish poem. Perhaps it's your best. Anyway, I felt very envious in reading it. I'm a fisherman myself, but all my fish became symbols, alas. The description has great splendor, and the human part, tone, etc., is just right. I question a little the word breast in the last 4 or 5 lines, a little too much in its context, perhaps, but I'm probably wrong. I was in Nova Scotia a long time ago with my grandfather trout fishing. All I remember of the coast is Yarmouth Harbor at low tide from a steamer called the Yarmouth, and some dismal low-tide gulls and a horrible after-seasick feeling, something like death, which as a boy I assumed I was immune to. Glad the review was all right. I suppose what you said that night at the Jarrells started me off on a theme for your poems. I think Randall deserves the credit for reviewing you properly. Mine was only later and longer. Puffins are in my book of New England birds, but I've never seen one. I expect to be in New York sometime between September 1st and 14th on my way to Washington, and if you're there then, we'll try to have the dinner we missed last spring. Sincerely yours, Robert Lowell. P.S. Thanks for all the pleasant, undeserved things you said in your letter.
630 Day Street, Key West, Florida, January 1st, 1948. Dear Cal, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for sending me The Complete Angler. I had a copy and read it once, but lost it long ago, and I am delighted to have it again. It is wonderfully soothing reading and wonderfully precious reading here in the land of big game fish and Hemingway. I sent you something that I thought reminded me of your Bathsheba poems a little, or maybe even of just your poems, though I could only say why in the vaguest way. Something masculine, emphatic and regular, but sort of toughly so, and slightly somber, etc. Pauline Hemingway came back at New Year's, and I moved to the above address. Some dear old friends of mine, the wife is a daughter of John Dewey, come here for 2 or 3 months every winter, and usually they keep the upstairs apartment for guests, but this time they kindly offered it to me. It seems to be my lucky in real estate year. It isn't as deluxe as my other quarters were, but better to work in a way. The kind of meager hideousness you can look at once and forget completely. And it has a beautiful view over the harbor, the fish market, etc. When somebody says beautiful about Key West, you should really take it with a grain of salt until you've seen it for yourself. In general, it is really awful, and the beauty is just the light or something equally perverse. Selden Rodman has written and wants me to come to Haiti. I could board, it seems, with Margaret Sanger. He has a jeep and knows all the little villages where the painters and poets live, and I know it would be beautiful, but you can imagine why I hesitate. I suppose it is too good an opportunity to pass up, and maybe if I can get a friend here to go with me, I may go. I seem to be talking to you like Dorothea Dix, but that is because you apparently are able to do the right thing for yourself and your work and don't seem to be tempted by the distractions of traveling. That rarely offers much at all in respect to work. I guess I have liked to travel as much as I have because I have always felt isolated and have known so few of my contemporaries and nothing of intellectual life in New York or anywhere. Actually, it may all be to the good. The water looks like blue gas. The harbor is always a mess. Here, junky little boats all piled up, some hung with sponges and always a few half sunk or splintered up from the most recent hurricane. It reminds me a little of my desk. The local bookshop is run by an Englishman and his wife, who is about 20 years older than he, very cute, really, with dyed bright pink hair. They play chess in the corner and very much dislike being interrupted by a customer. The other day, a man I knew went in to buy a book and asked for it timidly. Hugh, the Englishman, said, "Good heavens, man, can't you see I'm about to make a move?" When I first went in this year, the wife asked me in her jolliest way what I was doing now, writing or what? I said writing, and she replied, "Ha ha, always something." Always affectionately, Elizabeth.
Ipswich, Massachusetts, August 16th, 1948. Dear Elizabeth, if you'd come to Ipswich, you'd have found waiting for you and Dick, Elliot, and Mrs. Chandler, the woman who almost converted Mrs. Sortwell, and my first project for you. Age 41, weight 155, hair full black graying. He has lived for 20 years in a spick-and-span little white house with 2 aged servants, tending lambs and reading Thoreau and writing a book which no one has seen. Think I can guarantee that you won't. I interview him tomorrow. Outs. He has gone mad once or twice, very stable at present, rides but can leave it alone, and lives with his coffin and tombstone. Means, small but adequate. I think we'll use him as a decoy. I'm having a form printed, age, weight, income, interests, apathies, aversions, past, and a composite physical examination stamped by a notary. Do you want this before you meet them? Question of strategy. Here is my starting list. Joe Alsop, Ted Retke only makes $6,000 a year, which doesn't cover his eating and drinking, but he has a genius for sponging. Captivated by your Chicago picture. Oh, goodbye, ballpoint pen. My cousins, Carlisle and Pearson Winslow, and my Uncle Cott. Really the best of all. 3 houses, a yacht, $100,000 income, works from 9 to 5, absolutely no interest in the arts. He's married at the moment to Aunt Sarah, but he's already divorced an actress and he knows all the ropes. This would be a personal triumph for me. I've never gotten anything from him except occasional old-fashions, some turtle soup, and a carton of paper matches marked Bobby. He's a bit old, but wonderfully preserved, ramrod straight, and brown-haired. Mother says he was a tremendous catch. This is all I've been able to scare up for the first day, but things are in the saddle. You'll make your headquarters here. With each candidate, you'll go on a moonlit paddle. Costs $1, which I'll pay out of my traveling expenses. We'll see which one you would least know was in the house before 5 and is most entertaining after 5. Me back to life. I'll write you a serious letter when I get to Washington. You were an angel to put up with all my imbecility and bad behavior. I'm almost a new man, thanks to you. Or is one ever? Affectionately, Cal.
Stonington, August 22nd, 1948, Sunday afternoon. Dear Cal, I think you've done an enormous amount of groundwork already, and I can see I picked the right person to solve my problems about my future for me. I must say I like the sound of the uncle best so far, but don't like the idea of any unnecessary publicity. Don't forget the Oriental angle. In fact, I'd settle for some form of dignified concubinage, as long as it was guaranteed. Carly's room is occupied by a very cheerful lady watercolorist who transports a yogurt-making machine around with her, and also the works of Mary Baker Eddy. I suppose I'm going to find out how she reconciles them, although I don't want to. Another watercolorist called on her and remembered having traveled on the boat from Halifax with me last summer. They talked and giggled until midnight, and I suppose made yogurt. A little old stonecutter is in the little room, and I'm afraid he has silicosis, if not tuberculosis, by the coughing. The town is bursting at the seams because it is the weekend of the Granite Engineers Convention. I used to call on the Miss Moore who paints here and her father, and now I wish we'd done it while you were here. They are both very nice, and he is a retired Latin professor, 83, from Columbia, who has been working away peacefully all through the war at a translation of Livy for the Lowell Classical Library. His manuscripts went back and forth from and to England all at the time without any trouble at all. He still writes Latin poetry just for amusement or for his friends' birthdays, etc. He's very stylish and gallant and seemed like something from an earlier age, and I think you would have enjoyed him. He uses Latin puns in his conversation, most of which I'm afraid I couldn't understand. Your friend in the drugstore, whom I can't like, try as I will, keeps asking me if Bob is coming back because he knows a young lady in Deer Isle, a sophomore at Holyoke, I think it is, who is writing a paper about you and would give anything to meet you. She will be very disappointed, he said. I'm alternately thinking of Yaddo and studying my freighter trip booklets. Affectionately yours, Elizabeth.
Cosmos Club, Washington, D.C., August 23, 1948. Dear Elizabeth, a sticky Boston day, a lunging walk with Frank Parker halfway across Boston, ending with a call on Hyman Bloom against my better judgment. We talked about printing, compared the arts, Oriental mysticism, suffering, why you were always on some littoral move, why he never moved, and had 5 or 6 beers. I have misgivings, but I think it went off. A sticky New York day. Went to the end of the 3rd Avenue L alone, lunch with my publisher, said your manuscript had been refused over his head. A lot of shop talk, long milk and lemonade session with Jean at the Grand Central Station. And we listed about 100 useless and sordid preventatives for restlessness and solitude, but you'll laugh us to scorn. A gummy Sunday in Washington. Slept, went to the office and read my mail, the papers, went to Henry VIII, which I'd wanted to see for years because somebody said I should, or shouldn't. And a ghastly Douglas Fairbanks Jr. movie called Catherine the Great. Did the Times crossword, read Apes of God, sleep. Now I'm back in my loose harness. I'm unhappy about the Carly business when I think of it, but it's too near, and I forget as much as I can. Have you ever read Constance Adolphe? It's all there, a bit worked up and romanticized, but not much. I have acquired a phony, spruce, disillusioned tone, but it's only Washington. Affectionately, Cal.
September 8th, 1948. Dear Cal, I think you said a while ago that I'd laugh you to scorn over some conversation you and I had had about how to protect oneself against solitude and ennui. But indeed, I wouldn't. That's just the kind of suffering I'm most at home with and helpless about, I'm afraid. And what with 2 days of fog and alarmingly low tides, I've really got it bad. And I think I'll write you a note before I go out and eat some mackerel. The boats bringing the men back from the quarries look like convict ships, and I've just been indulging myself in a nightmare of finding a gasping mermaid under one of these exposed docks. You know, trying to tear the mussels off the piles for something to eat. Horrors. Also, there's a small lobster pound with 4 posts at the corners that reminds me strangely of your sunken bedstead grave. But I can't think of any more that would be practical for the next month or so. Sometime I wish we could have a more sensible conversation about this suffering business anyway. I imagine we actually agree fairly well. It is just that I guess I think it is so irresistible and unavoidable there's no use talking about it, and that in itself it has no value anyway. As I think Jarrell says at the end of 90 North or somewhere. I've just been reading through that new collection of Eliot's criticism. Some books arrived, thank goodness. And he is one of the few poets now, I think, who can really write about it convincingly. And then I don't even like him when he gets that oh-so-resigned tone. What I really object to in Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts isn't the attitude about suffering. You're probably right about that. It's that I think it's just plain inaccurate in the last part. The plowman and the people on the boat will rush to see the falling boy any minute. They always do, though maybe not to help. But then he's describing a painting, so I guess it's all right to use it that way. Oh, well. I want to see what you'll think of my prodigal son. I like this story from the New York Times. a composition by a child in the 3rd grade. I told my little brother that when you die, you cannot breathe, and he did not say a word. He just kept on playing. Write me a note when you have time. Affectionately, Elizabeth.
Mr. Robert T.S. Lowell, Beverly Farms, Massachusetts, September 18, 1950. Dear Elizabeth, my father died quite suddenly on the 30th of August, and we've been resuscitating and maundering with my mother. His death was painless, not really tragic, for he had little besides filling the days to look forward to. He was not a suffering or heroic man, but rather, as someone said, happy-seeming, always smiling or about to smile, and deep under, half known to him, apathetic and soured. There was at least one great might have been, a first-rate naval career. The death seems almost meaningless, as is perhaps always the case when the life has long resigned itself to a terrible, dim, diffused pathos. We sail now on the 28th, a Thursday, and plan to go to New York on the Monday or Tuesday before. Now I think there's no escaping us for you. You must name some days you can see us in New York. Or perhaps you'd prefer to come here for the weekend. In any case, don't slip away.
March 21st, 1952. Dear Cal, heavens! I started this yesterday and got interrupted and left the typewriter uncovered overnight and have just had to brush off a large, thick cobweb. I started out intending to go all over the continent, but I seem to have become a Brazilian homebody. And I get just as excited now over a Jeep trip to buy kerosene in the next village as I did in November at the thought of my trip around the Horn. I wasn't even particularly interested in Brazil to start with, but it was my freighter's first stop. In fact, I wanted to go around the world, ending up about now visiting you, only they had made some mistake about my reservation on that freighter, so I haphazardly settled on South America. I have some Brazilian friends in Rio I used to know in New York, so I went to visit for 2 weeks and have stayed 4 months. I haven't been in Rio much of the time, though, just go for a haircut or to see about a visa once in a while. Lotta de MS, my hostess, has an apartment there on that famous Carte Postale beach, but lives mostly in the country, though that gentle expression scarcely seems to fit, in Petropolis, a mountain resort about 40 miles off, magnificent and wild. She is building an ultra-modern house up on the sides of a black granite mountain, with a waterfall at one end, clouds coming into the living room in the middle of the conversation, etc. The house is unfinished, and we are using oil lamps, no floors, just cement covered with dogs' footprints. I don't know whether you'd like it or not, and I've seen so little of the country, actually, and it is so tremendous. Probably it is all too formless for you and not nearly enough people. Lotta knows everybody. I've met or looked at many of the literary lights, but as she says, she's retired and very fed up with Brazil, as all the Brazilians I've met are. They yearn for 1, Paris, 2, New York. New York is a recent taste, just 10 years old. It was considered rather vulgar to go there before, and Lotta was much criticized for spending over 2 years there. There is a great Catholic revival on, I gather, and large families are the style, 10 or 12, all the boys named Jose something or other, and all the girls named Maria something or other. These are always shortened into absurd nicknames that stick for life. I met a very elegant Magoo for Maria Augusta, or Donna Baby for an elderly lady. I am now Donna Elizabethci. For heaven's sakes, please keep me informed about your addresses so I can write to you, and I hope you'll write to me. I'm probably going to need it much more than you are. This will reach me until April 19th, then I'm going to Key West for a week, then Hotel Grosvenor, 5th Avenue and 10th Street, for 6 weeks. I want to see some poems. Antonio Vieira, Lotta tells me, was a minor Portuguese saint who suffered from bi-localization, much funnier in French. I am now studying the poems of the most popular modern Portuguese poet, Fernando Pessoa. Ever heard of him? Who had a 4-split personality, wrote 4 different kinds of poetry under 4 different names, volumes of each, and committed suicide sometimes in the 30s, though if alive he'd be just Miss Moore's age. As I've already written to Randall, maybe personality splits are particularly Portuguese. I've run into a few real-life ones, too. Oh, my title is now, has been for months, A Cold Spring. A poem titled that, too. And now I suppose it will appear in November. Give my love to Elizabeth. What is she writing? Please write again, sooner. I have a toucan named Uncle Sam in a chauvinistic outburst. He's wonderful, gulps down jewelry or pretends to, can play catch with grapes, and has brilliant blue eyes like neon lights. With love, Elizabeth.
November 29, 1953. Dear Elizabeth, I think about you continually, you and your studio and your Brazilian world. I'm sure you are as happy as you sound, but I don't approve at all. Like a rheumatic old aunt, I would gladly spoil all your fun just to have you back. I think I'll try and have your payments on your trust fund stopped. We just bought a house in Duxbury, Mass. 1740 red cedar shingled, 1950 oil furnace, 8 rooms, kitchen, garage, 3 acres, stream, flagpole, 10 miles from Plymouth, 40 from Boston, $10,000 mortgage owing. It's ours. We'll be moving in early April when I finally get through the last of my teaching. You must come then, and we'll build a replica of your Brazilian house, and you can swing through the years back and forth from one to the other like a pendulum. This letter may have a peculiar rhythm. That's because I've just read in Time that I'll have cancer of the throat in 6 years if I go on smoking 50 cigarettes a day. Elizabeth's figure for me. I don't think I'm scared enough to stop, but I'm starting my 2nd day. It's surprisingly easy. Anyone can do it. And unpleasant. Writing this letter is difficult. It's as though I were drunk or asleep. You wish you were both. As soon as you start to do anything that requires any thought or concentration at all. Elizabeth started stopping a month ago and was very Spartan and undemonstrative about it. I don't think she suffered. Now, after listening to me for a few hours, groaning and boasting, she's ready to quit. I guess you've heard about Dylan Thomas's death. He died 4 days after a brain stroke, which seems to have immediately finished his mind. The details are rather gorgeously grim. He was 2 days incommunicado with some girl on Brennan's staff in some New York hotel. Then his wife came, first cabling eternal hate, and tried quite literally to kill and sleep with everyone in sight. Or so the rumors go in Chicago and Iowa City. It's a story that Thomas himself would have told better than anyone else. I suppose his life was short and shining as he wanted it. Life, alas, is no joke.
June 7th, 1956. Dearest Cal, I don't know why I've been so slow about writing to you, since I think of you every day of my life, I'm sure. But now I really must, because a week ago Saturday, to my great astonishment and joy, your Christmas present arrived. Not even tarnished, nothing to pay. They didn't even open it. I think you were very foolhardy to trust it to these mails, but I am delighted with it, and we have used it for milk for tea every afternoon since. It's an awfully pretty little picture, and where on earth did you get it? And yes, it is very much like here, except for the elephants, and I don't think we have hooded cobras, but maybe we do. We certainly have enough of them, called cobras too, and all sizes. The inscription makes me very proud and self-conscious, always hoping that some observant guest will ask me all about it, and if they don't, I tell them anyway. You probably know all about the Pulitzer business. That, and just before that, a trip to Diamantina and writing a piece about it, having pretty much taken up the past 2 months. I was really surprised, having thought all along that it had already been given out, and I'd not seen about it. It was very funny here. A reporter from O Globo shouting at me over the telephone, and I kept replying in a cool New Englandy way, "Thank you very much." And he shouted again, "But Donna Elisabetta, don't you understand? O premio Pulitzer." I honestly feel from the bottom of my heart that it should have gone to Randall for some of his war poems, and I don't know why it didn't. I really do seem on the frivolous side compared to him, and there's so little of it. Well, one never knows about these things or how one should feel about them. As I'll never forget Caroline saying to you, "I'll try to live it down." Please do forgive me for being so slow about writing. Thank you for the really lovely picture. And I hope you and E are both well and flourishing on Marlborough Street. Tell me more about it and your summer plans. Why not come here? With much love, Elizabeth.
June 18, 1956. Dearest Elizabeth, we are going to have a child. It will come sometime in January, and already we are exhausted. We lie about on sofas all day eating cornflakes, no-calorie ginger ale, and yogurt. Elizabeth never moves except to turn the page of an English newspaper or buy a dress. I never move except to turn on my hi-fi radio or go on expeditions to second-hand books. E's doctor has decided that we had better not go to Maine, so we will probably spend the summer here. However, E has been told not to spend all her time shopping, so we may go to Maine after all. This isn't quite how it really is, but the last 4 days here have been scorchers, 94 on our coldest floor, and we are very disorganized and cynical. But how we boast people whom I had utterly felt cut off from, my barber, my dentist, the head of the Boston University English department, wives of friends, children, to all of them I can't stop talking and bragging. Elizabeth had rather a painful first month and still feels languid, but is much more comfortable. We hear of women, Eleanor Clark, who ski all through pregnancy, give birth in bomb shelters without doctors, etc. But we don't approve, and are timid, delicate, and antebellum. I had no idea that the Christmas present would be so late, and had begun to fear that you were somehow offended or had to pay a fine at the customs. It really was mailed early in December. 5 months arriving in Brazil. I must mail your next year's present early in July. The picture came from Treffery and Partridge, a little silver shop opposite the State House. The picture looked suspiciously like one we once inherited from my Aunt Beatrice, who for the first 16 months of her marriage lived in India and had a staff of 60 servants. For the 60 remaining years of her marriage, she lived in Boston and could never adapt. I am so delighted about the Pulitzer. I was on the Bullingham and National Book Award committees and tried to get the prizes given to you and or Randall. Your chances were killed by Phyllis McGinley, who thought you were serious or a woman or something. The National Book Award went to Auden, a wonderful poet with not so good a book, while the Bullingham went to Conrad Aiken, not such a good poet, but with one of his best books. Everyone said you and Randall were young and would have hundreds more chances. Phyllis McGinley dominated one meeting and Mrs. Biddle the other. Did you hear about Randall being made the consultant for the next 2 years? We were driving through Virginia at the time of the announcement. The early morning edition had a small front-page picture of Randall, very bearded and looking like a seedy French Second Empire baron. Slowly, the editors began to realize that they had a sensational photograph. All day, it grew larger and larger, till by evening it almost covered the entire page, blotting out the whole world. We are liking Boston and have quite a few friends. In some groups, we seem unspeakably strange and bohemian. In others, we seem very grand and social. It's fun to puzzle people. But oh, it's wonderful to be in one spot 2 successive autumns, and now a third is coming. How I wish you would come and pay us a very long visit, several years. Couldn't you translate Howells into Portuguese and spend a long time boning up on local Boston color to be used in your introduction? We can't be much farther away from you than the sources of the Amazon.
September 24th, 1956. My dear Sir Robert, my apologies for being so slow about writing. I've been awfully busy lately finishing up that translation, done at last, thank goodness, and going back and forth to Rio to the dentist and to see the authoress of the translation, or the original, rather, now 76 years old. I'm so afraid she may die before the thing appears. She says, if only Aunt Madge could have lived to see me printed in English. Aunt Madge would be about 125 if she had. Her husband, over 80, is a phenomena. He just retired from being president of the Bank of Brazil for the 4th time and looks about 60. He goes over every word with a fine-tooth comb and sends me pages and pages, hundreds of notes, corrections, recommendations, suggestions, importante, etc., in the tiniest, clearest handwriting. Now he's even talking to cutting out pictures of trees, gold panners, etc., and gluing them to the notes, and drawing very elaborate sketches, maps of church processions, etc. He thinks he knows English and corrects mine, all wrong, of course. The last thing he read was Boswell's journal, so he tries to force his wife's childhood diary into that style. I'm calling it Black Beans and Diamonds, but he is putting up a stiff fight for as you were. As you wear, as he says it. Well, they're a marvelous couple. I don't believe I've congratulated you yet about the baby, and I hope you are both keeping well and strong and cheerful. I'm very probably these days. I'm very pro-baby these days. Maria Elizabeth is 18 months old now and beautiful as an Abyssinian princess and learning to talk. We also have Lotta's sons, 2 older children, 2 and 3, here for long stretches from time to time and run a regular nursery school and enjoy it very much. Couldn't you arrange to have the christening coincide with Marian's 70th birthday? I'm really hoping to get back to the USA for that. The picture is really used every single day for tea. I hope Elizabeth is keeping well. Please write soon all the news. With much love, Elizabeth.
February 7, 1957. Dearest Elizabeth, upstairs, Harriet Winslow Lowell is crying as rhythmically as breathing. Lizzie and our beaver-like professional baby nurse, Miss Elsmore, are not in theoretic or emotional agreement. Miss Elsmore, red-haired, dumpy, in her late 50s, supported by 40 years' practice and pre-Dr. Spock's baby book, believes in letting a baby cry before eating. Miss Elsmore doesn't really believe that Lizzie can enter a room correctly. Poor Lizzie isn't allowed to play with Harriet except for 30 minutes between 6 and 6:30 when she would like to be relaxing over an old-fashioned. Morning, noon, and night, our house shakes, quakes, and continues to stand while the opposites war, thesis and antithesis, lion and unicorn, and nothing resolved except that Miss Elsmore remains in the saddle but not unchallenged. The worst is that Miss Elsmore is so devoted, accomplished, and even in her expert style, gentle, that any substitute would be unthinkable. And we have even committed ourselves to hiring as her eventual successor and long-term nurse, Anne, no miss, an elderly, very talkative and ladylike Anglo-Irish Quebec spinster, Miss Elsmore's girlfriend. Miss Elsmore is already foreseeing and planning Anne's regime. With Anne, toilet sitting should begin in the 8th month. Frank Parker says, we are very lucky not to have a nurse that condemns both father and mother and eats all meals with the family and never allows the conversation to stray from baby virtue and baby care. I'm really mad about my little daughter and feel as though I had been up to now lacking some prime faculty, eyesight, hearing, reason.
February 27th, 1957. Dear Cal, you certainly make Boston sound very attractive these days. I'm not sure whether I can get there the second week in April or not. I don't think I'm arriving in New York until April 5th or 6th, but we are planning to stay for 6 months probably, and I'll be getting to Boston more than once, surely. How soon I go for the first time sort of depends on the condition of what my elderly aunt in Worcester calls her gallbladder. Hers, not mine, of course. Won't you be there the 3rd week in April, perhaps? Thank you and Elizabeth for your kind invitation to visit you, but since Lotta will be with me, I think we better stay at the Vendôme or someplace. That sounds as if Brazilians had awful manners, but I merely mean it's a little too much visitors for you. Once Lotta went to Boston and chose the Hotel Puritan because she thought the name was so wonderful. I have acquired one Brazilian present for Harriet W., if only it doesn't scare her out of her first year's growth. I just noticed another story by Elizabeth in a New Yorker we just received. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, though. I am terribly envious, and I'd feel a lot happier about this trip if I had a story or two there now. Oh, and did you send Venice Observed? It arrived from Boston on my birthday, and I was awfully pleased to have it, and I think it must be from you. I was very curious to see it, probably wouldn't have bought it for myself. And speaking of my birthday, I received a tiny clipping from a Newark paper. Today's birthdays, Lana Turner and me. Surely that's fame.
Castine, Maine, August 9, 1957. Dear Elizabeth, thanks for speaking to Lizzie about your misgivings. I see clearly now that for the last few days I have been living in a state of increasing mania, almost off the rails at the end. It almost seems as if I couldn't be with you any length of time without acting with abysmal myopia and lack of consideration. My disease, alas, gives one, during its seizures, a headless heart. I am not going to write very much now, but I do want you and Lotta to know that I am at last in reverse. I am taking my anti-manic pills, 79 milligrams of sperine, no more than what my doctor prescribed on the bottle, but too much to drive a car or even see people much. The effect is something like the slowing and ache of a medium fever. One's thoughts are not directly changed and healed, but the terrible overriding restlessness of one's system is halted, so that the mind can again see life as it is. I want you to know, oh dear, I wanted you to know so many things. Do you remember how at the end of that long swimming and sunning Stonington day, after Carly's removal by Tommy, we went up to, I think, the relatively removed Upper Gross house and had one of those real fried New England dinners, probably awful. And we were talking about this and that, about ourselves, and I was feeling the infected hollowness of the Carly business draining out of my heart, and you said, rather humorously, yet it was truly meant, when you write my epitaph, you must say I was the loneliest person who ever lived. Probably you forget. And anyway, all that is mercifully changed, and all has come right since you found Lotta. But at the time, everything, I guess I don't want to over-dramatize, our relations seemed to have reached a new place. I assumed that it would be just a matter of time before I proposed, and I half believed that you would accept. Yet I wanted it all to have the right build-up. Well, I didn't say anything then, and of course the Ebharts' in-laws wasn't the right stage setting. And then there was that poetry conference at Bard, and I remember one evening presided over by Mary McCarthy, and my Elizabeth was there, and going home to the Bard poets' dormitory, I was so drunk that my hands turned cold, and I felt half dying and held your hand. And nothing was said. And like a loon that needs 60 feet, I believe, to take off from the water, I wanted time and space and went on assuming, and when I was to have joined you at Key West, I was determined to ask you. Really, for so callous, I fear, a man, I was fearfully shy and scared of spoiling things and distrustful of being steady enough to be the least good. Then, of course, the Yaddo explosion came and all was over. Yet there were a few months. I suppose we might almost claim something like apparently Strachey and Virginia Woolf. And of course, there was always the other side, the fact that our friendship really wasn't a courting, was really disinterested, bad phrase, really led to no encroachments. So it is. Let me say this, though, and then leave the matter forever. I do think free will is sewn into everything we do. You can't cross a street, light a cigarette, drop saccharin in your coffee without really doing it. Yet, the possible alternatives that life allows us are very few. Often, there must be none. I've never thought there was any choice for me about writing poetry. No doubt if I used my head better, ordered my life better, worked harder, etc., the poetry would be improved, and there must be many lost poems, innumerable accidents, and ill-done actions. But asking you is the might have been for me, the one towering change, the other life that might have been had. It was that way for these 9 years or so that intervened. It was deeply buried. And this spring and summer, really before your arrival, it boiled to the surface. Now, it won't happen again, though, of course, I always feel a great blitheness and easiness with you. It won't happen. I'm really, underneath, utterly in love and sold on my Elizabeth, and it's a great solace to me that you are with Lotta. And I am sure it is the will of the heavens that all is as it is. I wish we had 3 more weeks in low gear, drifting with the wind, sustained by 3 or 4 servants here, when you and I and Lotta and Elizabeth could have passed the time without hurry or pressure. But that too will come, and I am sure everyone loves and admires and approves of everyone else, and are happier than a month ago now, because a great block and question mark is gone. We go to Boston on the 5th of September. Perhaps the 15th or thereabouts would be the ideal time for you and Lotta to make your visit. And I promise to take Lotta to Raymond's and Ivor Johnson and Charles Street and my father's old tacky beloved Army-Navy stores. Wherever there's hardware, there we'll go. Love, Cal.
Petropolis, Brazil, December 11th, 1957. Dearest Cal, I don't know why I haven't been able to write to you sooner, really. I don't often get these letter-writing blocks, and particularly about my favorite correspondence. All the way down on our freighter, I composed endless letters to you full of profound new ideas, but they just evaporated into the ocean air. Then when we finally got here, not until November the 4th, so many complications arose immediately that I couldn't write any letters for 2 or 3 weeks, or not real letters. We were kept going back and forth to Rio to get things out of the customs. In fact, half of our belongings are still there. At one point last week, the customs not only had our things, but had lost all our papers, including our passports, etc. It was Kafka puro. For example, they weighed the Victrola records, wrote down the transformer as an air conditioner, etc., etc. All the laws about customs have been changed recently while we were at sea, I think, and they are 3 months behind with their work. The sheds are piled high with everything under the sun, from pathetic household effects to complete barbershop equipments. Beside my crate of books, there was a very old knife sharpener's outfit. You know, those wheels they push about the streets? Some poor old Portuguese knife grinder is waiting to set up business in Rio, I suppose. We spent several days just sitting about on crates. I read 2 Conrads in the process, in a heavily alcoholic atmosphere. Somehow the officials always managed to break some poor immigrant's gallons of wine every single day. Well, this is still going on, but Lotta now has a power of attorney from me to take out my belongings while I supposedly stay at home to work and make us money. I did write some necessary letters to aunts and agents, and I think I felt that writing you would somehow make my exile just too final again. Well, I must face it. Your hammer has been much admired, and we keep it in our bathroom now instead of with other tools, just so it will be safe. You should hear Lotta describing Maine. It sounds like the 18th century ideas of the Gothic. We are going to visit friends for a week over Christmas to the seashore, a famous place called Cabo Frio, Cold Cape, where I've never been and where I'm supposed to see Lotta's ideal ocean landscape. also go fishing for amberjack, etc. The friend is the champion fisherman here. Strange the way one's life goes in little cycles. Since Brazilians are mad about anything chocolate and get a special thrill from it because it's so bad for their livers, I have been requested to bring along 4 dozen brownies, something I've introduced to Brazil, and a large chocolate cake. You see how innocent our lives are here, just making money and eating sweets.
February 9, 1959. Dearest Elizabeth, I will write you a real letter in a few days, but this is just to ask a favor and make a suggestion. How would you feel about writing a blurb for my jacket? It would be the only one I'd use, and of course should be written any way that pleased you and seemed natural. I know how well you like my stuff, or hope I do. However, these things are sometimes awkward, and then I've dedicated Skunk Hour to you, and a blurb mightn't be the right thing. Anyway, think it over. I've decided to throw the old PR prose piece into my book, about 50 book pages, and perhaps rather engulfing for the verse. But I can't see myself writing any more autobiography for ages, and hate to see my piece yellowing away in the old magazine. I'm afraid I can count on my older relatives disliking the prose. However, they wouldn't have liked the personal poems anyway. Many thanks for Harriet's lovely dress. She is very keen on men now and knows how effective her new splendor is. 2 weeks ago, when Lizzie and I were having a somewhat impassioned discussion, she said, "Daddy's poggy, I am a pickup, Nathan's a pain in the neck," and we instantly reconciled. Dear Elizabeth, I think of you every day and miss you. Our love to you and Lotta, Cal.
February 1959. Dear Cal, I am sorry this has taken me so many days. I hope you can use it, or some of it. As a child, I used to look at my grandfather's Bible under a powerful reading glass. The letters assembled beneath the lens were suddenly like a Lowell poem, as big as life and as alive, and rainbow-edged. It seemed to illuminate as it magnified. It could also be used as a burning glass. This new book begins on Robert Lowell's now familiar trumpet notes, see Inauguration Day. Then with the autobiographical group called Life Studies, the tone changes. In these poems, heartbreaking, shocking, grotesque, and gentle, the unhesitant attack, the imagery and construction are as brilliant as ever, but the mood is nostalgic and the meter is refined. A poem like My Last Afternoon with Uncle Devereux Winslow or Skunk Hour can tell us as much about the state of society as a volume of Henry James at his best. Whenever I read a poem by Robert Lowell, I have a chilling sensation of here and now, of exact contemporaneity, more aware of those ironies of American history, grimmer about them, and yet hopeful. If more people read poetry, if it were more exportable and translatable, surely his poems would go far towards changing, or at least unsettling, minds made up against us. Somehow or other, by fair means or foul, and in the middle of our worst century so far, we have produced a magnificent poet.
March 5th, 1959. Dearest Elizabeth, I am overwhelmed by your blurb. I sent it on to Giraud and said very emphatically that I wanted it used entire. It's in good time for the jacket and will probably go on the inner flap. Frank has done a good picture in black and white of a relaxed, grieving or dreaming lion before a corridor of light bulbs. Me, I suppose. I like the way the burning glass, etc., softens one for the surprise of in the middle of our worst century so far. I think your blurb really is a part of the book and adds much to it. Perhaps now my relatives will think twice before blowing up. What's new? I am waiting for a young man, 32 years old, New Zealander, and interested in promoting New Zealand poetry. Sounds deadly. But someone sent him on to me, and I can't get out of it.
July 27th, 1960. I think Friday, at any rate. And marketing day, and the day someone is bound to arrive. Dearest Cal, please never stop writing me letters. They always manage to make me feel like my higher self for several days. You ask if I have ever found reading and writing curiously self-sufficient. Well, both Lotta and I read from 7 a.m. intermittently until 1 a.m. every day, and all sorts of things, good and bad, and once in a while I think, what if I should run out of things to read in English by the time I'm 60 and have to spend my old age reading French or Portuguese or even painfully taking up a new language? And then I've always had a daydream of being a light housekeeper, absolutely alone with no one to interrupt my reading or just sitting. And although such dreams are sternly dismissed at 16 or so, they always haunt one a bit, I suppose. I now see a wonderful cold rocky shore in the Falklands or a house in Nova Scotia on the bay, exactly like my grandmother's, idiotic as it is and unbearable as the reality would be. But I think everyone should go or should have gone through a stretch of it, like your Third Avenue stretch maybe, the Notebook of Malta Loredz Briga stretch. And perhaps it is a recurrent need. But let us not say, to quote Miss S. again, I've fallen in love with solitude. What you say about meter, well, I have loads of thoughts on the subject, and I think I'll have to write again tomorrow. I have a theory now that all the arts are growing more and more literary, that it is a late stage, perhaps a decadent stage, and that unmetrical verse is more literary and necessarily self-conscious than metrical. If I were Shapiro, I'd write a book about it. And have you read Art and Illusion by one Gombrich? It is fascinating. I find it is time to go to market. What kind of plan do you have for your opera? Or is it an opera? Now you must teach Harriet to swim. Or have you? It is just the age to learn. I believe in swimming, flying, and crawling, and burrowing. With much love, Elizabeth.
August 9, 1960. Dearest Elizabeth, I've been coming to Boston at intervals during the summer to keep up my therapy. This is the last, and I am gathering a clutter of things together to take to Maine in a few hours. Strange times, like a retreat, almost alone here in the empty house, translating and usually a wonderful letter from you waiting for me. More on solitude and meter. I've just been doing some Baudelaire in meter as strict as his and have never had such a workout. 3 poems have about killed me. I think he is unlike any of the later Baudelairean French poets. In him, the fire comes from the descent of his Racinian rhetoric into the material of Flaubert and Balzac, or something of that sort, so that if you remove the finish, he's gone, though still rich in a flat, prosy way. In Rimbaud and Laforgue, the finish goes. In Mallarmé and Valéry, the material. This is a horrible simplification, but he is different. I never realized that such wonder could be done with a sentence, moving through its terrible balances and metric, and so seldom turning into a mere fireworks of syntax. I've also done Rimbaud's Poet at 7 in rhyming irregular lines, and think I've lost his terrible bull-like perversity, jamming and crush, the detestable, as Louise Bourgain would say, Alexandrine, yet keeping it. I think he rather hated meter and syntax, though a great master of both, while Baudelaire gloried in both. I guess I don't really like solitude. The fun is hammering bits of it out of a crowded life. For oneself, I think one should keep the door open for strict, disorderly, and free meters. God knows the chances are so slim of breaking through the crust, writing something alive. One ought to have several possible techniques ready. Harriet is terrific, like living with the new forces. I don't think she knows how frail we are. But being a child, she is heavy on her feet, and we can almost keep up with her by cheating and using cunning and withdrawing into the shadows she can't understand. Well, Goodbye, my dear. Love, Cal.
Rio de Janeiro, June 15th, 1961. Dearest Cal, I have started many letters to you lately, and I have a whole untidy file of papers, clippings, and notes for letters to you that I've been carrying back and forth from here to Petropolis for so long now, I am just going to begin. Since the post office has definitely deteriorated lately, I don't know whether you've got my last 2 letters or not, or whether perhaps you did answer. Anyway, I had a letter a while ago from Pearl Kazin in which she told me, hoping at the same time that she wasn't the first to let me know, although she was, that you had been sick again. Very briefly, I gathered, and were already recovered. This was awfully bad news. Both Lotta and I are very, very sorry and disturbed about it. Surely New York itself is partly to blame. I do hope you recovered as quickly as Pearl seemed to imply you had, and that you are all right again. I'm not even sure where you are now, at the new address or where. It is cruel and unfair, isn't everything? Dear Cal, if you only knew how many imaginary conversations I have with you all the time and how little any of this represents what I am really thinking, doing, etc. Lotta and I talk about you a lot, and we both hope and pray you are better, that things are going well, and that your life is matching the splendor and success of your work. Surely we don't have to choose between them quite as narrowly as Yeats says. I realize I should get back to New York for a bit, where, when I find all my jokes have to be translated. They translate worse than poetry, by far. It is pouring, and the sea is raging. Lotta, who's developing a positively Wellingtonian style of official letter writing, is writing hard in one room and I in another. She sends much love, and so do I. Elizabeth.
85 East End Avenue, apartment 14G, New York City, June 27, 1961. Dearest Elizabeth, I'm okay, and have been since April, and have been meaning to write you since April, but I shy away from giving a lot of personal history. This has happened so many times, one feels a little cut off from one's kind. I was in a hospital for 5 weeks or so, less high and in an allegorical world than usual, and not so broken down afterwards. Once more, there was a girl, a rather foolish girl, but full of a kind of life and earth force. And once more, a great grayness and debris left behind me at home. Now we are back together, wobbly but re-knit, almost. We have sold our Boston house and bought an apartment here, 15 West 67th Street, and will be here settled when you come in October. I hope you will stay with us some of the time at least. I have a rather large plan, risky to mention at this point when not a line has been written, but I would like to try a long, long poem about Hitler and the Second World War, done more or less chronologically, short scenes, prose, strict and free verse, and many styles. It would take many years to do, if it could be done at all, and almost anything could go in it. I could get away from the too personal, use history, and perhaps catch a great chunk of the times we have endured. Harriet will be almost 5 when you arrive, strong, long legs, a powerful climber, an actress whenever men are around. She has 2 boyfriends her age, and many mine, including me, and is learning about life in large scoops. I loved your letter, as always, and am thrilled at your visit. Really come this time. Write again soon. Write again soon, and I will be less hangdog and more fun. Best to Lotta, and love to you, Cal. P.S. Lizzie tells me there's another letter from Boston, so I'll write again then. Somehow it's hard to write very fully or interestingly or honestly about personal matters. I always feel my mother's moralizing, wrestling with my father's optimism. Almost from birth, I decided they were both wrong and the truth lay elsewhere. Then, from time to time, I talk like both of them at once.
Rio, November 26th, 1963. Dearest Cal, I haven't really anything much to say to you. The last days have been like a bad dream, of course. But I feel like writing you a note. Lotta came home early from work Friday to tell me about Kennedy before I heard it on the radio. Although there's been a radio and TV strike for a week or so, and only the Ministry of Education radio keeps going. The papers all got out special editions that night. We were out, and the sight of the crowds was awfully moving. The streets full of people, the newsstands mobbed, and many people crying openly. The grief here has been genuine, all right. They felt, rightly or wrongly, that Kennedy was a friend of Brazil's. You know Brazilians are much more formal about death than we are now. I must have had 15 or 20 telephone calls and quite a few calls in person of condolence. They feel so much closer to their politicians than we do, too. All Americans should feel as if they'd lost a relative to their way of thinking, and they have much quicker emotional responses than Anglo-Saxons, or than I have, at any rate. Lotta had lunch with Carlos today, and he said he was just beginning to feel normal again, whereas today's the day I'm really beginning to feel badly. One TV station came back on finally, and so we've probably seen some of the same awful newsreels you have. Those blown-up cars swaying like gelatin around curves, those fat Texas faces, solemn and stupid, those endless views of cops' backsides covered with holsters and cartridges. Oh, God, what a mess. Perhaps some of it will have cleared up by the time you get this. But I'm afraid it's going to drag on and on.
Castine, Maine, July 16, 1965. My dearest Elizabeth, here are my sentences for your book. Not good, I fear, in comparison with yours for me, in which a marvelous image jumps into the universal, into the world. I had a pleasant day in my barn composing it. I am sure no living poet is as curious and observant as Miss Bishop. What cuts so deep is that each poem is inspired by her own tone, a tone of large, grave tenderness and sorrowing amusement. She is too sure of herself for empty mastery and breezy plagiarism, too interested for confession and musical monotony, too powerful for mismanaged fire, and too civilized for idiosyncratic incoherence. She has a humorous, commanding genius for picking up the unnoticed, now making something sprightly and right, and now a great monument. Once her poems, each shining, were too few. Now they are many. When we read her, we enter the classical serenity of a new country. I finished nothing worth keeping for a year. But suddenly, when I got up here with letters and long-distance calls still swarming in about my White House business, I got going. I enclosed the long poem I wrote. It sounds good, I think, and it's rather witty and tragic. I guess the only thing to do is to keep writing, but only publish what has a spark in it. I am old enough, almost, to wait. For the last few days, the Castine flags have been at half-mast for poor Stevenson. I got a degree when he did at Williams, and he said, "I've been following your new public life with interest, and I must say some enjoyment." God knows what he meant. Contradictory reports are coming out about what he really thought about his duties at the UN. Like Louis MacNeice, whom I also saw a few weeks before his death, Stevenson looked unusually healthily red and relaxed. Reading his first volume of speeches, I was disappointed and thought such a man could only make his mark by being elected, yet I was wrong. He graced our harsh scene with a kind of kindness, nuance, everything tinged with himself, the most attractive American statesman in our lifetimes. Yet what he said no longer had great importance, and sometimes seemed merely a rather wistful rephrasing of Washington. his nuance but not his heart. Still, such modesty, and ambitious but still true modesty, offers a lesson, though one may fail to follow it. How wonderful you are, dear, and how wonderful that you write me letters. I had a rather glowing account of you and Lotta from Sylvia Marlowe. In this midsummer moment, I feel at peace, and that we both have more or less lived up to our so different natures and destinies. What a block of life has passed since we first met in New York and Washington. How much I love my little, not very well treated and indomitable family. Love, Cal.
Rio, August 2nd, 1965. Dearest Cal, I should have written to you several days ago, I know. I think I have been so overcome by your paragraph about me that I couldn't concentrate on a simple letter. You should have seen me shedding big tears. I thought, no, this is too good. I'll have to tone it down. It came to Petropolis, and Mary read it to me over the telephone. Then we went up last weekend, a day or so later, and I saw it with my own eyes. Also, Bob already had it printed up, so the whole jacket more or less was there. He was naturally very pleased, too, thought it terrific. I like especially, of course, being curious and sprightly. Both words I hope I really live up to. I only wish the book were worth it. I honestly do not think it is. About 4 poems please me. That's all. I don't think I told you, but I finally decided to put your name under the Armadillo poem since you have liked it. I have a longer, grimmer one about Copacabana Beach, too, that is to be dedicated to you, but I didn't get it done in time, and I did want to mention you somehow or other in this book. Well, when it appears, it may be a bit better than the Armadillo, and, well, we may be a terrible pair of log rollers, I don't know. However, I do know that I meant every word I said, and I think you do too, in the kindness of your heart. I've just read straight through a huge anthology, A Controversy of Poets, and your familiar 3 poems in that are the only ones I'd, well, cross the street for. I envy you Maine right now and yearn for something cold and gray and dry-ish, speech or manners. I saw a very good page on you in the London TLS, and I was glad they liked that Stonington poem particularly. In fact, my dear boy, you are absolutely everywhere these days, and I'm just delighted. I hope you're having a wonderful, peaceful summer, as peaceful as can be expected, and that everything looks unchanged and beautiful there. Eat some blueberries for me. Thank you again and again, Cal, for your paragraph. Lots of love to you and your family, Elizabeth.
March 23rd, 1967. Dearest Elizabeth, if you could look out your window and up the coast a stretch, you might almost see Lizzie and Harriet on the sands of Barbados. Letter from Harriet. Dear Robert Lowell, it is very, very hot here. I am dying of the heat. And in between, there is an air conditioner in our room, which is naturally pretty constantly in use. Oh, lovely English language. What a weight off my soul that things have lightened and you and Lotta are both on your feet and together. And so full of shrewd, charming, never-ending observation, your old self, enriched, coming out of the tunnel. I should have known that nothing could really suppress you, but it's awfully worrying. We all seem so frail, really, under the full, frail morning spider webs we spread in the sun. Dull, methodical articles come out on me now and list my rather sparse stock of imagery, among them spider webs. Now I must tread cautiously. Like what you say about Latin. It's so clipped, small in words, etc., and sparing of words that it sometimes seems like an equivalent to language rather than language as we know it. So if it can be translated at all, it seems a kind of miracle. Nolan has a lot of, on the whole, much more ambitious drawing and color pictures for my imitations. Faber is going to bring out a really lovely edition of the Baudelaires, about twice as big as Near the Ocean, and very grand. Giroux and everyone at Farrar are terrifically excited about bringing out your collected poems. Then you'll take your grand and rightful place. Don't you think you should put in a few more stories, at least The Prison, which everyone inquires about and can't find? A little after you, a couple of years, I'm going to bring out my collected. Rather a problem. The books somehow seem units, hard to cut, yet full of dross. I'm afraid the time has passed when I can do anything to the point by revision. It's not chipping off this and that, but a need for a new breath, some fountain of youth they could be boiled in to emerge young and less blemished. Now I seem to have a huge appetite for wasting time, desultory reading, fumbling daydreams. To be in bed early with a lot of light stuff to read seems heaven. Can this be age? No. All my love to you and Lotta. Cal.
February 10th, 1972. Dearest Cal, I've reread the excerpt from The Dolphin a good many times now and feel I can say a lot more about it, and now feel I understand all the sonnets pretty well. This is pre-Frank, too, who'll undoubtedly make some things even clearer for me. He arrived safely on Monday and came here for a hasty supper off the end of the ping-pong table before my first party began. He was woefully tired and pale, but full of his visit with you and so excited by it and happy about your poems, etc. I'm having dinner with him tonight, so I hope to be able to hear lots more. The party was a great success, I think. At least I enjoyed it myself very much. It was a mixed sports and poetry evening, beginning and ending with some of the Olympic Games on the TV. The figure skating was marvelous, especially, and I am smitten with the Dutch long-distance skater, too. And going on to ping-pong and poetry, all very animated. The pauses are most agreeable, no matter how one feels about his poetry, unpretentious and talkative and gay, and James Merrill was here. Well, it was very nice, and I got to bed about 2:30 after washing all the dishes. Then I got up at 7 to go to New York for Marianne Moore's funeral, what I really am writing you about. Frank didn't even know of her death last Saturday morning. She had had several more slight strokes fairly recently and had been really unconscious for some time. The wonderful nurse, both nurses were wonderful, also Gladys, the faithful maid, telephoned Louise Crane that morning to say Marianne had just slightly evaporated. I am glad it is over at last. She lay in state, or wherever it's called, on the Monday in the Presbyterian Church on the corner of 5th Avenue and 11th Street, and Warner, her brother, gave a prayer he composed thanking everyone who had cared for her these last years. I heard bits of this later, and it was fine. Thank goodness he is too frail to deliver the funeral sermon he's been working on for several years. The funeral, or two of them, one private and one public, were at her church in Brooklyn. She'd helped compose the program herself, and it was very nice. Hymns that she'd quoted in her poems, footnotes, etc. And she'd wanted it in a morning glory blue cover with "Beauty is everlasting, but dust is for a time in gilt." I was going to mail you one and left them at the airport, but Eastern Airlines found the envelope and is mailing them to me, so I'll send you one later on. Well, these affairs are always a mixture of the moving and the awful and the funny. I went over with Louise and Dr. Annie and Margaret Miller. A great many people we know were there, of course. During the lunch break, or whatever it was between the two services, I talked mostly with Bob Giroux, who looks much better than he did the last time I saw him, much thinner, but he is still very depressed by Berriman's death. He told me you are writing a piece on Berriman. Lincoln Kirsten seemed to be the only person in tears throughout, he and the nurses, but that was only natural. The hymns were strange, and Louise whispered to me, "All the singing seems to be coming from the right-hand side, in back of us." So I looked, and of course, that was where most of the Negroes were sitting. Annie looked beautiful, very chic, with a black veil on her head. Then I realized that the last time I've seen her, I've probably always had dinner with her after her office hours, very late, when she is probably extremely tired. I and others wondered why Auden wasn't there. The weekend, or starting tomorrow, I'm going to try hard to finish my half or quarter-done small piece on Marianne. Of course, it should have been written long ago, but I procrastinate. And then I really haven't had time to do my own work until now. I almost wish I hadn't said I'd come back next year to do the same thing. But where to go if I don't? It's an awful problem that haunts me all the time. But as the world grows smaller and every place gets to be an escape for more and more Americans, maybe I'd better hold on to the Casa Mariana after all. With much love to you, love and best wishes to you all, Elizabeth.
April 30, 1973. Dearest Elizabeth, I wonder if my last ever reached you. In my woolly-witted way, I mailed it to Harvard. I can't find any American to talk about Watergate, though the English are glad to, but without one's own anguish and fervor. Sickening, fascinating gobbets come out in each paper, but it's too much. Unless the country can somehow be cleaned up. I think the corruption has been going on long before Nixon, yet he is a criminal silhouette on things, government almost by the mafia, the day of Goulart. It's strange, though. So many worse things have been happening to our country for the last... But what is the precise date? Years. One feels dirtied. Or rather as if one's insides were force and money. Philip Larkin spent last weekend with us. He looked older than T.S. Eliot. 6'1", low-spoken, bald-deaf, death-brooding, a sculptured statue of his own poems. He made me feel almost an undergraduate in health. And somehow, old as the hills, he is 4 years younger. I asked him about a poem, Wild Oats, where he speaks of a girl he met a few times in his 20s, a bosomy English rose, and had kept 2 photos of her in his billfold. And there the 2 photos were. Her breasts invisible under a heavy coat, small, the same, and no more than passport pictures. He is the best poet still writing here, I think, perhaps by far.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, May 30th, 1974. Dear Cal, since I have just corrected 8 take-home exams in which the students discussed, among other things, some of your early works and wreaked havoc with the drunken fisherman, this card seems appropriate. Marks in. Oh dear, they write so badly, it is heartbreaking. All except 2 of them. I got back a few days ago from 4 days in Seattle, a rather exhausting affair, but I think it went fairly well. I forgot my reading glasses at the last minute and kept everyone waiting for 10 minutes. The president introduced me as a doctor of laws, etc., etc. Yesterday, I had a letter from Ashley Brown, who told me you forgot some of your papers when there, and that made me feel a lot better. That rather awful painter whom Frank admires so and keeps buying has done a gigantic picture based on the old photograph in time of you and me on the beach in Rio. Only he has made us our present ages, or even older, if anything, and weird-looking. I have a large bust, sagging sadly, and black glasses for eyes, and you are enormously long and languid with a little hair only on the back of your head. This is simple vanity, no doubt, for you as well as myself, but I rather resent this. And he gives the names, too. I saw Peter Taylor briefly in New York, as nice and funny as ever. I hope everything is going well with you and you're writing a lot. I think I'll try to tackle old age now myself. With lots of love, remember me to Caroline, Elizabeth.
Millgate Park, December 18, 1974. Dearest Elizabeth, Now that Caroline is back fresh from seeing you and Cambridge and everyone, I feel almost as if I had made the trip myself and talked to you at some length. This letter is difficult because if I don't pay attention, my most pressing news will be Caroline's trip. It's a terrific thing to have house and schools settled and know we'll be together. No 3 or 4 months that could have been born, perhaps, because they had to be. My suggestions for the end of your poem must have been troublesome. I think I've spent more futile hours trying to perfect something satisfactory, always pressing an invisible, the unimagined perfect lines or ending, for there it usually falls. Often I've given up and wondered why I ever found fault. There are the experiences we haven't had, working in a spool factory, etc., and can't imagine. And there are others, like the end of Lycidas, where all the experience is easily ours, but we can't turn to it or find the right sound. I've just spent a week or more on 3 lines, which finally ended in changing the position of 2 words. I did other things. I hope you won't bother anymore. You were probably right all along. I think about getting things right a lot when I haven't enough to make it matter. And often there is sprawl that cannot be arranged. We seem to be near our finish, so near that the final, the perfect, etc., is forbidden us, not even in the game. I see us still when we first met, both at Randall's and then for a couple of years later. I see you as rather tall, long brown-haired, shy but full of description and anecdotes, as now. I was brown-haired and 30, I guess, and I don't know what. I was largely invisible to myself, and nothing I knew how to look at. But the fact is, we were swimming in our young age with the water coming down on us, and we were gulping. I can't go on. It is better now, only there's a steel cord stretched tense at about arm's length above us, and what we look forward to must be accompanied by our less grace and strength. Well, no more dies irae. I wonder if Christians believing in immortality saw their lives as less circular. Just had a letter from Peter Taylor. He writes that all his letters begin by philosophizing and end with trivia. I think he meant he felt at home with trivia. We are getting ready for Christmas. 2 families in our house, each with 4 children. It's like Aunt Sarah's family Thanksgivings. Unlike her, none of us can make audible feast speeches. Give my best to Alice. Caroline sends love. Love, Cal.
January 16th, 1975. Dearest Cal, I think I sent you a postcard from Florida, but did I really? Anyway, I had a wonderful time there. Went on a 3-day sailing trip with old friends, went to a marvelous wildlife sanctuary, went swimming almost every day, got very tan, and so on. And came back feeling much, much better than when I left bleak Boston. I just got my mail yesterday, and it included a letter from you dated December 18th. I left December 27th. It's odd I didn't get it before I left. But no, I suppose not. The Christmas mail. Now, I have just talked to Frank, who says he talked to you and that you may get here before you get this. Well, I'll proceed with it anyway. Frank says that you have been having arthritis in your back, between the shoulders. I'm sorry to hear that. I have it rather badly too, and a touch of it in that spot, although my hands are the worst. The only thing for it is aspirin in huge doses. I am now going to be very impertinent and aggressive. Please don't talk about old age so much, my dear old friend. You are giving me the creeps. The thing Lotta admired so much about us North Americans was our determined youthfulness and energy, our never-say-die-ness. And I think she was right. In Florida, my hostess's sister had recently married again at the age of 76 for the 3rd time. Her second marriage had been at 67. And she and her husband, also 76, went walking miles on the beach every day, hand in hand, as happy as clams, apparently, and I loved it. A very plump, pretty, sweet lady, as naive as a very small child. Of course, it's different for a writer, I know. Of course, I know. Nevertheless, in spite of aches and pains, I really don't feel very much different than I did at 35. And I certainly am a great deal happier most of the time. This in spite of the giant oil tankers parading across my view every day. I just won't feel ancient. I wish Auden hadn't gone on about it so his last years. And I hope you won't. However, Cal, dear, maybe your memory is failing. Never, never was I tall. As you wrote, remembering me, I was always 5'4" and a quarter inches. Now shrunk to 5'4" inches. The only time I've ever felt tall was in Brazil. And I never had long brown hair either. It started turning gray when I was 23 or 24, and probably was already somewhat grizzled when I first met you. I tried putting it up for a very brief period because I like long hair, but it never got even to my shoulders and is always so intractable that I gave that up within a month or so. I think you must be seeing someone else. What I remember about that meeting is your dishevelment, your lovely curly hair, and how we talked about a Picasso show then on in New York, and we agreed about the Antibes pictures of fishing, etc., and how much I liked you after having been almost too scared to go, and how Randall and his wife threw sofa pillows at each other. And Kitten, of course, Kitten. You were also rather dirty, which I rather liked too. And your stories about the cellar room you were living in and how the neighbors drank all night, and when they got too rowdy, one of them would say, "Remember the boy," meaning you. Well, I think I'll have to write my memoirs just to set things straight. It will be nice to see you. Caroline and I had a real nice visit, as they say in Florida, and I'm looking forward to seeing her again. Alice is at BU Business School, poor dear, and will soon be coming for dinner after her class on taxes, which she insists she loves. So, I must stop and slice some green beans. See you later, alligator, as they also do say in Florida. With love, Elizabeth.
Cambridge, Mass., July 12, 1976. Dearest Elizabeth, Frank Bedard has just told me you arrived back in Boston in a wheelchair. A sad surprise, because you seemed in such good health here and safe with your new English drug. I am mailing this to Lewis, since I gather you will be out of the hospital by now. I still thrill to your visit. After a little, it seemed as if almost 30 years had rolled back, and we were talking brown-haired, callow and new in New York, Washington, or Maine. Voice and image seemed much more what we were than what we are, or is the essence as it was. Glad, too, you like my new poems, for I feared you mightn't. Today they are going to Bob Giroux, and though I already missed their presence, pressing on me to change, polish, do more, I have an almost physical sense of lightness, as though my shoulders weighed less and my baggage was stored in the station for a day. I am sure Frank told you he found us an apartment, better than any you've had, so say nothing to deter us. The uncertainty is so much more formidable from here. I think Cambridge will really be much more convenient academically and socially than Brookline. We only have a non-driving, like us, nurse. Everything now seems to carry me backward. One thing I was certain of was that England didn't have real summers, like my grandfather's farm or the Tate's house in Tennessee, or at most did for no more than 3 successive days. But it goes on. Nature's still now hidden and real heat. Sometimes I almost move to set off for the lake with my trolling rod for pickerel. How grandfather would have pulled the place and us into order. But the soil and everything on it is crumbling and wilting, sand browns with a blush of green. We should be moving in about the 20th of September. Hope you are now recovered and moving to North Haven. I think on clear days you can see Castine from the northern shore. I miss it all, and am now looking forward to getting back. Caroline sends her love.
Love, Cal.
North Haven, by Elizabeth Bishop. In Memoriam, Robert Lowell. I can make out the rigging of a schooner a mile off. I can count the new cones on the spruce. It is so still, the pale bay wears a milky skin, the sky no clouds, except for one long, carded horse's tail. The islands haven't shifted since last summer, even if I like to pretend they have. Drifting, in a dreamy sort of way, a little north, a little south or sidewise, and that they're free within the blue frontiers of bay. This month, our favorite one is full of flowers, buttercups, red clover, purple vetch, hackweed still burning, daisies pied, eyebright, the fragrant bedstraw's incandescent stars, and more returned to paint the meadows with delight. The goldfinches are back, or others like them, and the white-throated sparrow's five-note song, pleading and pleading, brings tears to the eyes. Nature repeats herself, or almost does. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Revise, revise, revise. Years ago, you told me it was here, in 1932, you first discovered girls and learned to sail and learned to kiss. You had such fun, you said, that classic summer. Fun. It always seemed to leave you at a loss. You left North Haven, anchored in its rock, afloat in mystic blue. And now, you've left for good. You can't derange or rearrange your poems again. But the sparrows can their song. The words won't change again. Sad friend, you cannot change.